The meeting will begin in 1 minute. The meeting will begin in 1 minute. Thank
Mm-hmm. Ready, steady, go. Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order and welcome to the Tuesday, February 16th Land Use Committee meeting. And outside of some housekeeping duties here to begin with, we have 3 items on the agenda. The first being arterial street and water distribution platting fees, and that's going to be presented to us by our beloved city engineer, Chad Heavey.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. If you could go...
I skipped the housekeeping. We first have to approve minutes, and since we did not have a quorum at our last meeting, we have 2 sets. So could I have a motion to approve the Tuesday, December 15th?
So move.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. All right, may I have a motion to approve the Tuesday, January 19th?
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Now, Mr. Heavey, it is your turn. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. Again, Chad Heavey with the Engineering Division of Public Works. And I am here to provide you an update on the arterial street and water distribution system platting fees. And I just want to say that these fees are based on a very objective approach, and there's a lot of math involved. So I'm going to do my best to get us through this, but there's going to be a lot of multiplication and division. So just bear with me.
Get the calculators out.
Well, we've done it enough. I think we got it right. But okay, just a little background. In 2008, we hired a firm called Duncan Associates. They assist local governments across the country with development fees, and we asked them to complete a nexus study for these platting fees. Now, the nexus study, the nexus defines the relationship between a development fee and the impact caused by new development. In 2009 then, we implemented these fees to fund improvements to arterial streets and water distribution systems in newly developing areas. The fees have been in place for 8 years, and they have not been adjusted since they went into effect. And then in 2015, we brought Duncan Associates back to update their 2008 study. And the goal of the update was to review the methodology used in 2008 and then to update the data with items like construction costs. Okay, there's a lot here on this one slide, but the methodology for both of these platting fees are based on the costs to serve a prototypical section of land, which is 640 acres. So when we talk about arterial streets, the one thing that we're going to calculate is the cost per acre per land use for the arterial street. And really, the more trips generated by land use results in a higher arterial street platting fee. And we'll go through all this in more detail as we get going. Similar for the water distribution system. Again, we're trying to calculate the cost per acre for that, to fund that water distribution system. In addition, the Nexus study updated, it included updated trip generation numbers, construction costs, the amount of developable acres per section of land, and the development intensity or density. Okay, two big items that are changes from the 2008 study. The first is the density of multifamily housing. The 2008 study used 8 units per acre. The 2015 study uses 16.1 units per acre. I'll just tell you that the number used in 2008, it was a number that we used. Looking back at all the information and data, it probably should have been higher. But 8 is what we used at that point, and we have a number today of 16.1. And if you look at this on one way to look at it is look at it on a per unit basis. And the new costs are approximately 14.1% per unit. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. The other thing to look at is the amount of developable acres per section. And so as we're developing the outskirts of town, we're seeing more green space. Thus, you see the acres go down that we're actually building on. And that, of course, there's less land to spread that cost over, so the fees go up. Okay, based on the 2015 study, these are the study recommended increases. Other than multifamily, I would say the 4 of the 5 are inflationary increases. And we'll talk more about the multifamily when we get to that point. You have the different land uses, zoning, the current fees, the updated, and then the percent change. Same thing for here. These are the Nexus study recommended fee increases for the water distribution system. Again, I would say another inflationary increase. Okay, now we collect these at the time of platting. And just to refresh everybody on what's going on at the time of platting, the plat subdivides land into lots, right-of-way, and easements. And so we're skipping a lot of steps here, but we start with a bare piece of ground, and then it's platted. And you can see the lots, you can see the utility easements, and you can see the right-of-way. So when a plat comes in to divide this land, that is when these fees are charged. So they are charged before anything's ever constructed on this property. Okay, we need to talk about this 30% funding. I didn't mention it earlier, but what we're trying to capture is 30% of the costs to construct an arterial street per section of land. So first thing we need to do is just differentiate between an arterial street and a collector street. There's a visual. Now let's just also talk about where these streets are at. This is a traditional grid street network that you'd see in the core of the city. The arterial streets are in red with the collectors in blue. And so everything looks in a grid pattern. Everything is perpendicular and for the most part. Now as we get out into the outskirts of town, you see more of these curvilinear street networks. And so the goal is we don't want these collector streets like Valley View or Bonson that travel many, many miles, and they almost turn into arterials, and the speeds can get higher. And so what we're trying to do is shorten these collector streets so that somebody doesn't feel comfortable getting on them and driving 4 or 5 miles. We want to get them to the arterial. And again, so today we're focusing on the arterials and the collectors. I'm not going to read these to you, but this kind of shows what goes into a collector street and what goes into an arterial street. There's just a lot of things. There's more land, there's more lanes, the streets are thicker, there's more utilities, there's traffic signals. All the way down to when we build these, we try to incentivize them to disrupt or limit the amount of disruption, and we also then have to include things like temporary business accesses. And so the point of this is to say that there's just a tremendous amount more that goes into an arterial street versus a collector street. Oopsie. Okay, the collector streets serve neighborhoods. They're built by the developer, and they cost approximately 30% of what an arterial street costs. The arterial streets carry traffic between neighborhoods and throughout the city and are constructed by the city. So, again, the goal of the arterial street platting fee is to fund that 30% of that arterial street, and the city funds the remaining 70%. If there wasn't an arterial street there, there'd be a collector street there. So we're collecting that money from the developer to pay for that 30%, while the rest of the community is funding the 70%. Okay, now we're going to get into some of the math, and as I talk, I'm going to focus on single family, but if you have any other questions, please stop me and we can talk about it. Okay, you can see here we have the 5 different land uses and the associated trips per acre. Now, the majority of this data is from the 9th edition of Trip Generation, which is a document published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. This study's information is based on a database that contains over 5,500 individual site studies and is a nationally recognized document used by transportation professionals when conducting traffic studies. And so if we take single family, we have 9.52 daily trips. We'll just say per house. So you getting up in the morning, driving to your gym, not me, but you, drive back, there's 2 trips. Now you drive to work and drive home, there's 2 more. Then that night you go to a basketball game, you drive home, there's 2 more. So there's 6 trips that you've just done yourself. Now, a significant other has the same routine, a kid or 2 in high school, the same routine. These trips per day add up. Again, this is a prototypical. You're going to have households that have more, you're going to have households that less. And so at the end of the day, for single family, you come up with a daily trips generated per acre of land. And for single family, it's 26.08. And we'll talk about that number more as we go. The one thing I will notice on this slide is the multifamily units per acre. That's where you see that 16.1. That number didn't come from that study. That number comes from the planning department, and we'll get into that in a little bit as well. So this calculates the trips per acre for each of the different land use. Okay, let's talk about that 16.1. Planning staff reviewed 40 projects constructed between 2010 through 2014 and 20 projects constructed before 2010. The densities, or units per acre, varied from 4.3 up to 61, with the average density being 16.1, and that's where that number comes from. Here is just a small sample of those projects. It's the 2014 multifamily projects with a value of over $1 million. And, you know, they're 41st and Grange, 69th and Cliff. They're in all areas of the city. But what you're seeing is a lot more 3- and 4-story apartment buildings, which put more units per acre, thus more trips are generated per acre. Okay, the other change we talked about is the amount of developable acres per section. In 2008, the number was 589. Today, it's 573.1. We subtract out from 640, we take out the arterial street right-of-way, which amounts to 24 acres. And then we subtract out the acres of green space, so drainage ways, parks, recreation areas, but it's really the green space. And we've seen, as we've gotten on the outsides of the city, that amount of green space has gone up. And so, and just another note, we do not charge the arterial street platting fee on the arterial street right of way or on that green space. So what that does mean, again, is like I said, is there's the amount of money you have to generate does increase because you have less acres that are paying the fee. Okay, we talked about the 573.1 acres. This is depicts the percentage of how a typical section develops. So 10% commercial, 6% multifamily, all the way up to 54%, which is single family. Now this next slide just takes that and it says that 54% of the 573.1 acres is 309.5 acres. So when we look at a prototypical section of land, we expect 310 acres of single family, 80 acres of industrial, 92 of office institutional, 34.5 of multifamily, and about 57 of commercial. Okay, a few slides back, we calculated the trips per acre, and for single family, we said it was 26.8. Now we're multiplying that by the developable acres per section. So for single family, it's 309.5, which gives us trips per land use. And so for single family, it's 8,072. When you total those all up for all the different land uses, we come up with 37,515 trips per day generated per section of land. All right, now we'll use that trips per section here in a little bit. So if you look at an or a section of land, it's bordered by 4 miles of arterial streets. And if you associate each 2 lanes of each arterial street with the adjoining section, you come up with 2 miles of a 4-lane road. And that's what we're trying to recover off of each section of land. So we have a cost per foot for an arterial street. There's that 10,000. We're trying to capture about 2 miles, so there's the 10,000 feet. So we have the construction cost, we have engineering in there and construction administration. We get to that $9.7 million to build those 2 miles of roads. Then we talked about we're trying to capture 30% of those costs. So you take 30% of the 9.7, now you're at 2.9. So you take that 2.9 million, you divide it by the trips per section that we calculated prior, and now our cost per trip is $77.60. We go back to the land use. Now we're calculating an arterial street cost per acre. Again, single family, the trips per acre was 26.08. We're multiplying that by the cost per trip that we just calculated of $77.60, thus getting you the cost per acre for each land use is showing up there. So for single family, it's $2,000 or $2,024. Okay, the water distribution system, it's the same philosophy. Each section is paying for 2 miles of 16-inch line. And so again, you see the construction cost per section, the engineering on top of that, the total cost per section divided by the developable acres per section, and that gives us a cost per acre of $1,970. Now that cost is split evenly no matter the land use. That 16-inch water main is what each section of land needs. If it's determined that there needs to be a 20-inch water main or a 24-inch water main or a 30-inch water main, those additional costs are picked up by the water fund. Okay, I believe you all received a letter from a group of multifamily developers last fall in opposition to these fees. In January, we brought them in, and I took them through basically the same presentation I have today. If you look at the top line, the one-time increase, it shows you today's fee, and if we went with the recommendation out of the Nexus study of the 130%, the fee would go from $36.20. Next year it'd go to $83.09. After that, it's a 2.5% inflationary factor. So every out year through 2021, it goes up 2.5%. The option, and our recommendation is, and the option we presented to them was, instead of doing the one-time 130%, let's do a 3-year stepped approach with that increase. So if you look at the year 2019, the numbers are the same. So the 3-year approach is, we're taking the current fee, and the number's probably 34.5%. So there's a 34.5% increase, 17, 18, and 19. And then after that, it's a 2.5% increase in 2020, and then in 2021. Okay, so here is our recommendation for the fees. For single-family, industrial, office, institutional, and commercial, we are recommending the fees as outlined in the Nexus study. And those would be fees that go into effect in 2017. And then after that, it'd be a 2.5% increase every year through 2021. Multifamily, we are recommending the 3-year stepped approach. So again, it's about a 34.5% in 17, the same in 18, the same in 19. And then 20 and 21 again are 2.5% inflationary increases. The recommendation for the water platting fee is the same as the recommendation from the Nexus study. It's going from that $16.53 per acre up to $19.70, which is a 19% increase. And again, our recommendation is that these rates remain as they are in 16, with the increase happening in 17. And I think what that does is it gives everybody a chance to understand the fees, prepare for them, projects in the hopper they can get through, and it gives them a good time period. And again, there'll be a transition that we have to go to, just like last time, but I think it's a fair approach. Okay, we have taken these to the Infrastructure Review and Advisory Board, and they were approved. We do have support from the Home Builders Association. As to the multifamily developers that we met with, we did not get a letter of support, but we did not get a letter of opposition. So I'll leave it at that. Today, I'm presenting this to you. The plan, or I'm asking for, I want to take this to City Council here in the near future. Again, an implementation date of January 1, 2017, and an annual increase that I discussed of 2.5% after 2021. Now, when you see the ordinances, we're recommending 2.5% increase through 2021. But the ordinance will state that we can either do a Nexus study update, or if we don't, we'll just annually increase those rates by 2.5% after 2021. There's a lot of people out here that have worked and spent a lot of time on this. I'm not going to thank them because I'll probably miss somebody, but we're here. I appreciate your time, and I'll try to answer any question I can.
Thank you very much, Chad. Okay, committee members, questions? Councilor Jamison.
Chad, what is the cost of the Nexus study? I was just thinking of in lieu of that automatic increase, just curious what.
I think I'm going to say about 15 or 17,000.
Oh, okay.
I think the actual contract amount was higher than that, but I don't think we've spent that, and again, the Nexus study right now is in a draft form, and I don't think there'll be very many changes, but we will have to have them finalize that. So we didn't. Yeah, it was a rather inexpensive
Sure.
study.
And if I could, the couple other questions. I saw that you had done what appeared to be an actual density report on multifamily. Did you do an actual study on like the residential, commercial, industrial, and?
No, the numbers we used again are based on those numbers generated that trip generation manual, and that database has over 5,500 different studies that have been conducted by different cities all over the country, and so we feel that those numbers that they use are very respective and appropriate for what we do here. For example, the density for single family was 2.74 homes per acre. Now granted, some areas of town we might have maybe 4 houses per acre, other areas we might have 1. But I mean, after reviewing the data, we felt they were appropriate to use that data published by that national document.
Okay, and that was really the other part of my question, was their understanding that there are neighborhoods that are far more dense than others, and using the same formula across all land. I'm just, inadvertently, I suppose you're putting pressure on the fact that you can generally probably maybe get by with, if you're doing a development, if you had a higher density, you can get more, if you're a developer, get more in return. I'm just thinking through some of the other unintended consequences of this change, and I'm sure like there's already been a rush of multifamily people coming to get their zoning and using the old platting fees prior to the new ones. So I'm just thinking down the line, but as long as you're comfortable with those numbers, obviously the last time you used 8, it was off a little.
Yep, it was.
And okay, as long as I just wanted to bring that up as a consideration.
And I'll just say this: I kept talking about a prototypical section of land. That's what this is all based on, is basically an average section. So across the city is how we have to look at how we're going to develop. And you're right, certain sections are going to have maybe some more commercial versus other sections. But when you look at the city as a whole, we felt those numbers were pretty accurate.
Councilor Anderson.
Okay. On the 2015 study revisions, you said 8 units, an acre to 16.1 unit per acre. And then you stated that the number used in 2008 should have been higher.
I believe now it should have been.
But at that point in time, the study that you were using.
That's the number we used in. If we went back and looked at it, it probably should have been 10 or 12, but we went with 8. That was the fees would have been, using 8, the fees are less.
Sure.
The increase the initial platting fee in 2009 would have been higher, and now this increase wouldn't have been 130. It would have been less than that.
So we're not trying to make up for anything that's happened in the past. We're just adjusting now to what the developers are doing as a business plan.
Right, and we looked at, we just have a lot more data. Things have changed. The economy, the platting fees, the financial securities, the development industry has changed, and that was kind of the real goal for this, was to look at what has changed since 2008 to today. What's changed in the development trends? It just seems that more people are going up. Less land, they go up. So we were, I think, pleased with what we did in 2008. We could have done things a little better, but I think this was a good study, and I think the numbers are pretty good.
Yeah, if I may.
Yes.
Are arterial streets, you stated that you try to collect 30% of the funding? Try to? No? Am I wrong
Yes,
in that
but
question?
let me, and I do have another spreadsheet to show you that you have in front of you. We'll get to that in a second. Yeah, we'll get to that. Now, when you say 30%,
Well, I didn't say 30%.
okay, but let me, it's not, if our arterial street expansion budget for a given year is 10 million, we're not trying to capture 30% of that, which is 3 million. We're trying to capture 30% of the cost for a typical section. So as that section develops, we've determined that $2.9 million is needed per section of land to fund the 30% of those costs. So instead of a collector street, they'd pay 100%. The arterial street, since there isn't a collector there, there's an arterial, we're trying to recapture that 30% that they would have spent anyway to build the collector street. So in each section of land, you know, we don't go out and build all 4 sections at one time. You know, we just built 41st from the Ellis Road to Sycamore. And a lot of stuff is platted out there, but we haven't built Sycamore from 41st to 57th. We haven't built Ellis Road. We have built 57th. So, and we look at this as we're one area. So fees collected in the southwest part of town can be used to build an arterial street in any other part of town. So I hope I answered your question on the 30%.
If I could continue, if that's.
Yes.
All right. So then, similar roads like North Marion Road, where we have the new McGovern School. Since that isn't developed out there.
You mean
we
Maple?
have- excuse me?
Maple?
Maple
Yep.
or Marion
Yep,
Road,
yep.
either or. Since that area isn't developed out there, we haven't updated those roads because Marion would be an arterial.
Exactly.
And because I've had complaints on like sidewalks and that out there, and that's another discussion, but that's.
I'm sure you've gotten more complaints than that, but.
Yes, but I mean, that's just something to use as an example, is that once it does get developed, then we start, you know,
Right.
doing the updating.
So, like, when the McGovern Middle School, when the school district platted that, they wrote a nice check for their platting fees. Now, but we took those funds and probably spent them on 41st Street or maybe on South Cliff. So, yeah, as these properties develop on the outskirts of town, they are paying the platting fees, and then we and you and us, we kind of prioritize where the most needs are for those funds, and then we prioritize and get those projects in the capital plan.
And one last one, if I may.
Okay.
Under the trips per acre, you have the daily trips and then units. You have, for single family, you have 9.52, and you explain that as having like a family of 4, I guess is sort of how I took that. And then with multifamily, you have 6.65. So are we looking at the multifamily only being maybe 2 people per unit, or how does that look
that's
at?
exactly right. I mean, you're going to see single-family homes that have 1 or 2 people up to, you know, mine has 7. Now, an apartment building, you're going to see some that maybe have 4 or 5, or, I mean, I guess we had 7 in ours at one point too in the apartment, but, you know, typically you're going to see maybe those households have 1 and 2 people. So the trips are less.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Staggers, any questions?
Yes, I've received some phone calls about the platting fees, and there's, you know, objections to the platting fees. And that raises the question, if we've noticed any movement of developers to the outskirts of Sioux Falls to avoid the platting fees.
I think before the platting fees, there was development going on in those other communities, and I think it continues both strongly in Sioux Falls and strongly in the other communities. And now, but I mean, I haven't seen any developers that have said, I'm not going to go to Sioux Falls. Sioux Falls can offer a lot of things that, you know, the smaller communities sometimes can't. In regards to roads, sanitary sewer, water, the other infrastructure. So I still think the development community is the development going on in Sioux Falls is very strong. And when it comes to arterial streets, we meet with as many developers that want to meet with us every year and ask them, if you had, you know, what's your top 3 priorities? And it seems that their priorities are our priorities, and you know, I can't think of an instance where a developer hasn't been able to develop when they've wanted to, because we've had utilities there and we've had a paved street there. So
do we have any numbers on the additional cost to housing this adds to?
I don't have any, but you know, if the and of course that isn't so single family, the fee is going up $250, about $275. So I don't know how they'll, I mean, it's up to their business model how they deal with that increase. So maybe the lots go up, maybe their profit goes down. I would tend to say the first one is the way it'll go, but you know, you guys get copied on all the bid tabulations. Things are getting more expensive, and we're just trying to collect, I think, a fair amount from the people that are putting trips on our roads.
Hey, Councilor Jameson?
Go ahead.
Chad, that does kind of bring up the history of how these all got started, these platting fees. And I could give it, you could give it, it'd be better from you, I think. But the intention was to, at the end of the day, was to get more arterial roads built so that development could continue. Developers wanted to participate to help those arterial roads get built. The city wanted to level off the second penny sales tax to add more money to help the growth of the community continue. That, I believe that was the intent of the partnership and the work of a lot of people before. But from your point of view, you were here then and you're still here now. What do you think we've moved that bar? Have we done what we set out to do from the beginning?
Well, let me just give you a little history. So before 2008, we had always charged developers fees or front footage fees for building an arterial street if they had access in a non-standard location. At that time, we had access tied to, if you had access, you paid. If you didn't, and it just didn't work. Access and financing, this kind of things have to be separate. So yeah, I mean, we spent 18 months with maps and figures, and we looked at all different means of funding arterial streets. And this was the solution that we brought forward and was implemented. A lot of communities use an impact fee, and it's charged at the time of building permit. We're one of the few communities that use platting fees, but the feel, and in my opinion, and after talking to a lot of people in the community, is they think plating fees work. They're pretty straightforward and simple. And like I said earlier, yeah, we have arterial street needs, there's no doubt about it. But when we meet with the developers and talk to them about where we should be going, where their priorities are, they're not listing this street that's not already in our priority list. And so some will complain and say that we're not keeping up. But I think we've done a pretty good job building new streets, so from gravel to pavement, gravel to an urban section with curb and gutter, and then again 41st Street going to the full arterial street. So I think we've done a good job. We're going to face some challenges, finding that balance from taking care of what you have versus expanding and keeping up with growth. But I think we're heading in the right direction.
Okay, go ahead.
No, if you have questions on that.
I do, and it goes back to the trips per acre.
Okay.
Is that based on current information available, or did you, since we're projecting out through 2021, is that an average over that period? The 08 study was done based on this trip generation manual. It was the 8th edition. It has thus been updated. And now it's the 2012 version, so that's, they probably update it every 4 or 5 years. But what you see as far as trip generation varied very little from the 8th edition to the 9th edition. So in some instances, the trips per acre went up just a little bit, and in some others it went down a little bit. So based on looking at those two numbers from the 8th edition to the 9th edition, I think the numbers we used for the next few years are good. Okay. We will certainly, when the next edition comes out, take a look. Okay. And if we get to a point where you see some drastic changes happening in the construction industry, we're gonna want to look at the numbers sooner than later to make those necessary adjustments. Okay. And then one last question. The multifamily implementation, since we're going to implement this over a 3-year graduated system, 2016, 2017, platting fees would be considerably less than what they're going to be in 18, 19.
If you did it in a 1 year.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you expect to see a boom in construction of multifamily units in these next few years? And if so, I'm sure the market dictates that. You can build them, but you have to have people that move into them. But would the city be capable of keeping pace with that?
I think you're going to see, I think, a boom no matter whether there's a platting fee increase or not. But what you're seeing is they're building them more dense. They're going up. They're not going out. And if you look at the sheet I have in front of you now, this is the history of the platting fees we've collected. And the actual numbers are listed there. The bottom line is the platting fees collected. The middle line is the sales tax that's went into the Arterial Street Expansion Fund. And then the top green line is the total of those combined. And so everything through 2015 is actually what we collected and what we spent. Now, the projections of 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21 are figuring in, we're using it based on what's been platted on average the last 3 years. And then each year we're adding in the number of the platting fee increase. And so these new multifamily projects that I'm aware of, they all seem to be in an area where we have sanitary sewer and other utilities are already there or planned. We're in the grand scheme of things by going to this 3-year approach for multifamily. Are we losing out on some funding each year? Yes, but it's compared to the program, it's a very small amount. So I think the 3-year approach, because it's such a large increase, is the fair way to approach this. And I think we are set up well to handle the growth.
Okay, thank you. Unless you have anything else to discuss on this item?
I guess the only thing I'm looking for direction on what the next steps. I mean, I'm prepared to bring these ordinances forward to the full council in
Certainly
March.
sounds like you've worked with all the stakeholders involved, and I commend you for that. Councilor Jameson, you've got a comment.
I'm just looking at the graph. The last time we started this, it went south. And I'm just sure hoping that it doesn't go south again on us. And that was always, anyway. The other thing is, as Councilor Kiley said, you have included the IRAB, which is a big deal. And that brings in all the stakeholders, as you say, and the home builders. And I know there's going to be people who aren't happy. So, I mean, as far as moving it to the rest of the council, there is a lot of math here and a lot of considerations. And you know, I know that the rest of the counselors are all here except Councilor Karski. And he was never good at math anyway. So I'm just saying that the rest of the council really has seen this, and they really, staff has done their homework and included all the right stakeholders, and it just seems probably a fashion to move it onto first reading.
Any other thoughts on that matter? Councilor Anderson?
Haven't had a long time to digest this yet, but this is something that I guess, Chad, you and I have had numerous conversations. I've had conversations and meetings with the home builders on this also. And, you know, my problem with the old formula was the way it was brought to the council. And basically, I don't want to just say sold to us, but the way it was presented to the council over the history of this, now that we have a good time period, it just wasn't working, and that it needed to be relooked at. And I also really applaud the home builders, the developers here in our city, Mark Cotter and Chad and your staff, for, you know, relooking at this and trying to come up with a new formula that would work better and be more representative of what we were trying to do here. And from everything I'm seeing, it is moving in the right direction. So I would believe this would be something that we could move on to the council.
If I may, I did, Councilor Jameson, I told my staff today if there's one piece of paper they'll hang on to, I said it's this one right here. So, yeah. So thank you.
I would think that maybe if you would just forward this information to the other members of the council, and I would feel comfortable moving to the first reading.
If I may, the information is available on SIRE.
Okay, good.
But I'm available for questions anytime. So.
Sure, and they can contact you between now and then. Again, I commend you and everybody else involved, all the developers and the builders, for getting together on this particular. Councilor Staggers?
Yeah, I think it was September 2008 is when we finally got this passed. And I didn't vote for it at that time. And I guess my mind hasn't changed since then either. So I guess I'm not very pleased with having increased costs for housing here in Sioux Falls because of this. And as I said before, I've had developers call me and say they're not happy about this. And how are we going to deal with Foundation Park? As far as, are we going to be charging platting fees there too? And so the city will also be paying for platting fees at Foundation Park?
Well, Foundation Park isn't our land, so we won't be paying.
Oh, so we'll have the new businesses that are
Yes.
paying it? Oh, okay.
Yes, it's.
Okay, so we're not going to plat it, but we'll let them.
Oh, they'll be platting it. They're developing the land. They'll be just like any other developer.
Okay.
Okay, Councilor Jameson.
Right, as a clarification, the Development Foundation is a recipient of funds from the city, but they're an entity of their own. So that, as the developer, they will pay those plating fees.
It's you know, it's the school district, it's the same way they pay the fees, so.
The two questions, just, you know, thinking about this process and thinking that, you know, the 3-year implementation, if you know that the math that you were doing before was wrong, and the idea of implementing it over 3 years kind of softens the medicine. I think you asked the IRAB committee and others about implementing them immediately, and there were crickets in the room, probably. Nobody wants that. But what it does is it kind of acknowledges that you have a problem, but you're willing to go forward with a existing problem because you don't want to make anybody mad. And the reality is you really need to recapture those dollars immediately and not wait. I mean, how did you balance that out?
Well, the math wasn't incorrect in 2008. It was the density that we used.
Okay, whatever.
And so, I mean, I could go back and say, okay, we've missed out on some fees since 2009, and the truth is we have. But, I mean, you know, when I look at the city growing, we're all in this together. And 130% increase for anything. I mean, it's no different than utility rates. I mean, at one point, maybe we should have had a lot higher rate increases than we did, but we went to something that was manageable, something that could be handled. And so, yeah, like I said, by doing this approach, we're gonna miss out on some funds in 17, 18, and 19, but I think that large of increase is hard to swallow in 1 year, and so
All right,
I feel that it's...
And the increases over those next 3 years are still pretty stout. Other last question, if I could, is the argument that others have made over the years that the people who redevelop within the city, and we have some major players who do that, and that's a great, wonderful thing to have them redeveloping, but they don't pay these plating fees. And they change the use of that land, you know, from what we've seen with a couple of hospitals in town and others to I'm sure that, as you know, the formula changes drastically from those redevelopments, but they're not paying the plating fees. Did you rediscuss that issue?
Oh, we certainly did. And you're right. When these areas of town redevelop, whether it's a university or a hospital, they buy up some houses, they tear them down. They don't have to replat. That new legal description can now be lot 1 through 25 of block 6. And they don't have to replat, and per state law, they don't have to replat. So, the way, now, and I will give you an example. 18th Street between Minnesota and Grange. I don't know when Sanford was built, but that street is a 2 or 3 lane facility today. And so if you just looked at that and thought, okay, traffic volumes on 18th Street have had to go up, but they haven't. So when a facility expands, yes, they're adding offices, but a lot of times they're taking people that they already have on campus somewhere else and kind of rearranging them. They're using, you know, they don't have to have more food services, they don't have to have more facility staff, and so when you look at it, you would think, okay, everything's got to be expanding and growing, but when you look at the numbers, I mean, I've wondered, when are we ever going to widen 18th Street to 5 lanes? But the volumes are going down, and so to capture, Counselor, what you're talking about would be going to an impact fee, and that would be charged a building permit. And so every time a building permit is charged or pulled, and I'm not going to say every time you need to shingle or put a fence up, but every time you're going to build a new building, you're going to pay a water fee based on the size of the meter. You're going to pay an arterial fee based on the square footage, the trip generation. Most communities have impact fees that have development fees. We don't have them. That's like I said, plating fees have worked. There was discussion. You know, a lot said that, you know, these plating fees are new, brand new. And is 8 years in enough data to say they don't work for the city? I don't think we're to that point yet. And so it's been talked about quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm going to draw this to a conclusion at this point since we have 2 more items on the agenda. If I would encourage counselors, if you have any other questions, that you can follow up with Chad. And good discussion. Thanks to everybody. Okay, the next item, item B, revisions to engineering design standards. Oh, Chad, one quick question that I forgot to follow up with. Did you have a date in mind where you'd like to come forward with first reading?
Thank you. You know, I'm open to, if you'd want to do it back-to-back weeks, if you'd one in March, one in April, I'm pretty open.
Yeah, Board of Equalization. So that's going to probably get in the way of some of our...
Right. Well, we don't meet on that Tuesday, or with the board does not meet on that Tuesday.
recommendations?
The board won't be, the Board of Equalization won't meet on the Tuesday night, but if you wanted to just have the committee recommend it to go to the city council, that's fine, and then they can work on a date that works for them.
Sure. Should we vote on that particular issue to bring it to first reading?
Yes.
Okay, all in favor of bringing it to a
Well, I'll make a motion that we move it to city council.
second? Anybody second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor of moving it to first reading, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay, that passes 3-1.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're up to item B, revisions to engineering design standards.
Good afternoon, Jeff Delories with the Engineering Division of Public Works. Today, three principal engineers, Ryan Johnson, Jeff Dunn, and Lance Weatherly, will address you on proposed changes to the engineering design standards, chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12. These changes include revisions to sanitary sewer, water distribution, and stormwater design standards. These proposed revisions have been presented and endorsed by the Infrastructure Review Design Board in meetings held in November, December, and January. Our intentions are, with your support, to bring the proposed revisions to the full City Council in March or April for adoption by resolution. With that, I'd like to get started by introducing Ryan Johnson. Ryan is our principal engineer for the sanitary sewer team.
Welcome, Ryan.
Good afternoon. Ryan Johnson with the City of Sioux Falls Engineering Department. Okay. Would like to present proposed changes to the city's sanitary sewer engineering design standards. The sections outlined in the first three bulleted items deal primarily with sanitary sewer mains located in the streets or the larger collector lines that go into drainage lays that collect the sanitary sewer from residents and properties and individual buildings. And sprinkled throughout those sections were sections that dealt primarily with the sanitary sewer service lines that went from the buildings to those mains. And so the intent with these changes were to pull those sections out and put them into a section that dealt with sanitary sewer service lines. So they were generally verbatim pulled out of those sections and then put into those service line sections. Any modifications that was made to the language did not impact the intent of those languages. And you could read through those up there. The service stub out diameters and references to that. Section 4.6, it talked about the minimum grade and the absolute minimum depth or minimum grade. Also talked about risers. Section 9.4.8.4 Also talked about the minimum slope on a sanitary sewer service stub. We'll get to where those sections landed in a moment. The next change in the fourth bulleted item was 9484. Talked about the physical requirements, and in this section it talked about the location of the sanitary sewer and the access points, and felt it was a good thing to add a requirement to place manholes 10 feet away from parking spaces. We've seen in the past where a vehicle's parked in an appropriate space or a designated spot, and it has a sanitary sewer manhole right underneath it. And it's a hindrance for our crews who are working on those and would like to progress from the upper reaches down. They can certainly come back to it, but we feel with just some awareness and thinking about these things up front with little to no cost, that they can be placed in an appropriate spot and help us get access. So the sections that I mentioned earlier that dealt with the sanitary sewer service lines were replaced or moved into section 9492, and again can read through all those sections. Very little language change, and the intent was not changed at all. Those were the extent of the changes for the sanitary sewer section. Certainly be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, seeing no questions, you can proceed.
Okay. The next presenter will be Jeff Dunn, who is the principal water engineer.
So this one's fast forward.
Yeah, it's the one to the right.
Good evening. Jeff Dunn with Public Works Engineering. I'm the water distribution principal engineer, and I wanted to discuss 3 changes to Chapter 10 of the engineering design standards for your approval moving forward. Section 3.8 deals with valving and isolating fire lines that run into buildings. Presently, we have 2 scenarios. We have a wall indicator valve and a post indicator valve. You might have seen some of these post indicator valves out in front of buildings. That's that image on the left. And if you really didn't know what you were looking for, you probably wouldn't have noticed that wall indicator valve, which is located on the right. I think there's a post indicator valve on the west side of this building. What that does is that has a window in it, and this window's got plexiglass over it. And the fire department, if they're on a call, this fire line runs into the sprinkler system inside the building. And that window will tell emergency crews or firefighters whether that valve is open going into the building. It'll simply say open or close. So the tricky part that we're running into now, and what I wanted to visit with you about, is by code, the post indicator valve has to be a certain distance away from the building. If the building collapses, the building wall collapses, that post indicator valve has to be as far away from the building as however tall the wall is. So in redeveloped areas such as downtown, there's not enough room to install these post indicator valves. So the fire department will grant permission to install a wall indicator valve because it's on the face of the building. It's not sticking up out of the sidewalk or what have you. So where I'm going with this is that if a wall indicator valve system is used, when the fire sprinkler people have to come in and do maintenance on that fire line and they have to shut off the fire line, they get really uneasy about closing the wall indicator valve because it's so close in proximity to where they're working on. Now in areas like downtown where we have high pressure, if they close that wall indicator valve and start taking apart the system close to it, it could come apart on them, and that's very hazardous. So what the sprinkler contractors have been doing is they have been going out to the main line on the street. That blue line is the main line for the city, and they will close that valve on the main line, that red dot next to the blue line that runs up and down. And what that does is that will automatically take the domestic service offline if it's connected to that fire line. That isn't true with a post indicator valve, because with a post indicator valve, that yellow service that you're seeing, the domestic service, that's tied in between the post indicator valve and the main line out in the street. So you can shut the post indicator valve, take the fire sprinkler system out of service, but the domestic stays charged. So what we'd like to do is, if a contractor or an engineer or a developer proposes a wall indicator valve, we would like for the domestic service to come directly off the main line. So that means that the sprinkler contractor, the fire sprinkler contractor, can go out to the street, shut off the main, and he doesn't have to worry about taking the building out of domestic service. Item 5.1, we had a change of the guard, I guess you'd say, with our backflow prevention cross-connection control program. That is now managed by the water division and no longer managed by the engineering division. 7.1.0, I added this text. We've been practicing this for several years now. When we have a redevelopment where homes go away or a building goes away and a new building comes in or a parking lot comes in, and we still have the domestic taps into those vacant lots, we like to keep those curb stops where we shut off the water going into the homes. We like to keep those curb stops to the surface because it helps us locate those. Oftentimes when the locating crews go in to identify where a water service is, they'll look for that curb stop on the property line, and then they'll paint that back through the sidewalk and onto the curb. If we don't have the curb stop at the surface, then there's a chance that we won't get it located. And if somebody's trenching through behind the right-of-way or directional drilling and they hit a service that wasn't marked, we have some problems with getting that repaired. So we want to make sure that the curb stops remain in place and that the contractor is folding those the service lines back towards the curb stop on the property side. Make sure that it's pinched closed. And that's all I have for you tonight. Is there any questions?
Any questions from the committee? Councilor Anderson?
You said, like if they tear out like a block of homes
Yes.
and create a parking lot,
Yes, sir.
why wouldn't they be required then to pinch those lines off from the main?
Well, the water service from the main to the curb stop is technically the city's responsibility. We maintain those. If they were to go in and take out a half a block of street and go into the street and cut those out to where it ties into the main, it essentially destroys the street.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any recommendations in terms of bringing this forward beyond this point, beyond the Land Use Committee?
Well, if you guys are in agreement with what we're proposing, I'd like to take it to the next council meeting.
Yeah, as a first reading?
Yes.
Any discussion on that?
I'd like to do the same thing that we've just done with the,
Pardon me, do you guys have more presentations
Yes,
on this?
I'm sorry,
You're
yep.
not done with that
Right.
yet?
Okay, now Lance Weatherly can speak to some storm drainage changes. Thank you.
Good evening, Lance Weatherly with the Engineering Division of Public Works. Going to present some proposed changes to Chapter 11 Engineering Design Standards for drainage improvements, some housekeeping items, some revisions, and some improvements. Start with Section 11.1.3.2. Basically, to summarize it, the intent is to change the industrial design return frequency for a minor storm, which is basically how the inlets and pipes how the system is designed from a 5-year, or from a 2-year to a 5-year. We did do some research on what communities are doing around the city, so we looked at Bismarck, Omaha, Rochester, those communities, kind of use that as a benchmark to basically make the system, require this system to be larger than what the current requirement is. Next section, 11.2.6. This is basically a housekeeping item, essentially taking what was stated in the previous section. It was repeated basically in this section, just referring to that previous section. So that is basically the main, if you see the strike and language additions there in that section, that's what the purpose of that is. Section 11.5.1, in summary, basically all drainage ways dedicated to the city shall have a maintenance bench, and this is what we are adding is the language along both sides, providing access to all channel areas. The intent for that is what we found if the city has been dedicated a drainage way with a maintenance bench on one side when Parks is doing noxious weed control, or we're doing vector control spraying for insects of that sort of thing. It can be difficult. Some of those drainage ways are a little wider, and if you're trying to spray across to get some noxious weeds, on some sides of the drainage ways there might be a lot of homeowners, might be a row of fences, so there isn't any access on the other side. So that is the purpose of this. Furthermore, we added in there after reviewing this, it's saying drainage ways adjacent to the right-of-ways proposed with one maintenance bench shall be reviewed on the city on a case-by-case basis for approval. The intent of that is if there's a drainage way next to a street, it can be accessed from the street and the bench would be on the other side. Of course, we would review those on a case-by-case basis to make sure that would be granted. Continuing this section, we are stating that the property corner elevation abutting our property elevation, so if in essence it isn't a property corner, it's a portion of the property adjacent to a drainage way, it shall be a minimum of 1 foot above the 100-year major design storm elevation. That's not referred to a structure or a house. That's saying basically what someone's backyard elevation should be in reference to that 100-year major design storm elevation. The second section here talks about minimum ground elevations. That's basically what the elevation of a foundation of a house is shown in a development engineering plan put together by developers and the development engineers. And basically we're striking the word recommended and saying minimum. So we are proposing to say minimum ground elevations for structures abutting or potential to flood by drainage ways or stormwater facilities shall be 2 foot above the overflow elevation or 100-year major design storm elevation, whichever higher. Some of that other language beyond that, it's mainly clarification. It's some housekeeping items with there. So, last two sections, kind of in summary in 11.7.5 talks about detention pond properties. Greater than 2 acres in size to be considered for dedication to the city. In summary, it must have a maintenance bench around the entire perimeter. Kind of goes hand in hand with wanting access on both sides of the drainage ways. We want to make sure we have access around the entire perimeter of any detention pond. Last section, section 12.3.3.4. This talks about areas draining more than, the current language says 10, we want to strike it to 5, shall be routed through a sediment basin. The intent of that is there was a gap with stormwater quality, when construction is happening, we have silt fence and things like that to prevent sediment from running downstream. There's an item called a silt trap and a silt basin. Basically, a sediment basin is a big brother to a silt trap. There was a gap in the acres here. Previously, there was a gap in the language between 5 to 10. We were requiring that higher one, but we are just saying that if you have 5 acres, it needs to be routed through a sediment basin. And I'll entertain and I'll take any questions that you may have, or try to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions specific to Lance's portion of the presentation? And didn't mean to slight drainage improvements. Councilor Jamison.
Lance, if I understand, you are the kind of the replacement of Andy Berg. Is that the
Yes, I am the
Andy?
drainage principal engineer that was previously held by Andy Berg.
Great. So I think some of the changes you've made are pretty, if you or the staff, everybody's has really acknowledged the need for change, because we've been challenged with the previous rules. One of the pieces that I've heard about and others have is the trenching of those existing drainage ponds or retention ponds, or I'm not sure what the term might be, sediment ponds. Did you address that? Because I've heard in the past a lot of people anxious about, somebody said they were going to trench it out, clean it out so more water could be stored. They haven't done it. The city doesn't have enough money to do it. We don't have a fund enough to do it every time we should. Did you address that or think about that in this as well?
I guess to answer that I would call that a maintenance requirement. We do, I believe we have over 200 drainage properties within the city, and those properties are maintained with utilizing, it's a team of street department. It's also use a team of water rec personnel. Also parks get involved as well with doing not just weed control, and also there's vector control. We prioritize our efforts every year for doing maintenance within drainage ways and ponds. This year specifically has been somewhat difficult with late frost in the ground, because typically we need it to freeze before we can get equipment in there and dig it up. But specifically maintenance, if a resident has a maintenance concern, they can bring it into the drainage team. We have a bi-weekly or a monthly maintenance meeting where we're coordinating that. And I guess what we tell people is when they say there's a lot of cattails in the drainage way behind my house, come clean it out. Our standard response is we need to prioritize it. We put it on the list, and we'll have a staff member go out there and look at it, see if there's an imminent issue, and then we prioritize it as such.
I could just add real quick too. You guys, we're in the middle of increases on drainage fees. So you have approved, and when we looked at those fees, we talked about the maintenance of ponds, and so the funding is there. What we'll have to do this year, since we couldn't get at it, we'll have to hire that done. And then you've also approved for 17 some additional stormwater staff under Andy Berg, and so they also will be actively involved. And I liked how you said Lance is kind of the replacement for Andy. So.
Well, thank you, and that helps. So really, the only thing I would add is if it sounds like we're addressing it in ways I didn't know of, but that list of those drainage areas and the priority or in which they're in, I think that would be helpful for me in my district, and I know probably others. If you could share that with us, that might be a tool for us to, when we encounter those complaints from homeowners.
Definitely, and when those come in, we look at what sort of equipment the city has available. If it's a large detention pond, we will contract that out, or we'll lease larger equipment short term to handle that. But definitely, we'll provide that maintenance list to you.
Okay, thank you, Lance. So we've covered engineering design standards relating to sanitary sewer, water distribution, drainage improvements. Is it safe to assume that you would like all of this then moved to a first reading?
It's my understanding that this would be a one-night resolution.
Okay.
We can work with Denise on where it might fit best in a particular Tuesday night to bring in front of council. We don't want to be item number 98 for you on a particular night. So we'll work with Denise, and if it's March or April or May, I guess, you know, it is not a pressing issue that they be.
Councilor Jameson?
This is a little out of order, but I can't help it. There's other counselors in the audience, and I had made the kind of the assumption that they didn't have objections to it going to a first reading. But I would only encourage maybe that we reach out and ask if they have objections to us sending it to a first reading, that they should raise their hand. Otherwise, we will assume that they're okay with that.
Yes, if it goes to a resolution, we don't have that second.
I'm sorry, just that we don't send it to an informational, more so that we do go right to the council as a full body.
That would be our hope, so too. Yeah.
Okay. We need to.
I'll make a motion to send this to the city council, regular meeting.
A second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. Which now brings us to our third and final item on the agenda, and thank you for your patience, everybody, that have been waiting for this item. And that's the Boulevard discussion, which we have been referring to as the right-of-way. And we're going to start out with a presentation, and I believe Matt is going to be the sole presenter from city staff. And then we're going to open it up, as we have with the previous two meetings, to public input. Then we will have a committee discussion following that. So, Matt, good to see you again.
Yep. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, council, for allowing me to present on this tonight. And what I would like to do tonight is just basically talk about where we've gone, how we got to where we are. We've spent a lot of time working on the parking strip. That's what we're calling it now, the parking strip ordinance. Last month, we were here for land use, and we had more of a presentation format where we presented just, it was kind of, we kept referring to it as in conversation form. We've had the luxury of working with our attorney's office on getting this into more of an ordinance form. So there's no big changes from last time. This is just into more of an ordinance format. So tonight, that's our intention, is just to kind of go through, it's still in draft form, go through this first draft of the parking strip ordinance. When we get into the actual ordinance itself, we list a lot of the whereases, and that basically is the ordinance in a nutshell, where we break it up and we're just basically describing the actual ordinance. So getting into the actual ordinance, the parking strip landscaping, and we're referring to as abutting owners, and this is where we actually define the area which actually is the parking strip. The parking strip is the area from the curb to the sidewalk. It's right in between, along the street, in between the curb and the sidewalk. And for purposes of this chapter, the parking strip is the area along the public streets and the avenues between the curb line or edge of roadway if no curb line is present, and the sidewalk line or the property line if no sidewalk is present. And what we're basically saying here on plant material is we want the parking strip to be covered with plant material, including turf grass, native grasses, cultivated flowers, wildflowers, fruits and vegetables, and then we get into basically what's restricted or prohibited. We're still sticking at plantings, and the plantings in the parking strip can be no higher than 3 feet from the top of the curb. And this description right here it kind of shows us the actual, what would be 3 feet. If you notice on the side here, we actually have a yardstick. So this gives a good indication of what 3 feet from top of the curb would be like. Yep. 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 So we've stuck with that, and that 36 inches. It kind of mirrors some other ordinances that we have in place with the driveway safety ordinance and the intersection safety zone. So like we talked about last time, we just wanted to make it, we wanted to provide, you know, the biggest thing with the parking strip, I guess we wanted to provide flexibility for our residents to actually plant native flowers, to plant native grasses, fruits and vegetables. So when we first sat down, we talked about that. To be honest with you, I think as a group, we were all over the board on what to allow for the height. And we kept going back to 36 because it mirrored some other ordinances. And we want to encourage flexibility. So we thought we were really comfortable with that 36. So we hope that the committee and the citizens are comfortable with that 36 as well. One thing we wanted to keep in there is that plants with thorns, spines, or other sharp, rigid parts are prohibited. That's basically for safety. And then we're saying shrubs, either evergreen or deciduous, or other woody deciduous plants are prohibited. And obviously, plant material, we don't want to see it encroach the sidewalk or the curb. As we discussed last time, that's another thing for our disabled people, our disabled residents, to actually be able to get down the sidewalk in a wheelchair. And we're still saying that trees are allowed in the parking strip per the city ordinance. And we want parking strips to be kept free of noxious weeds. And then turf grass, we still want to see that turf grass maintained at a height of no more than 8 inches. That's citywide, so we want to make sure we talk about that in this particular section too. And then the last thing there is International Fire Code states that a 3-foot radius clear space shall be around all fire hydrants. And then we're also saying that in that 3-foot radius around the fire hydrants, you can still have flowers in there, but we want to maintain that 8-inch height restriction there. And then other landscaping materials. In this section, we did put some information in here. We received a lot of great feedback from Mary Ellen Connolly. And we wanted to go ahead and put some information in here supporting Mary Ellen's cause here, that the parking strip should have sufficient topsoil depth to support vegetation, including highly organic permeable soils, which would allow for deep-rooted plants to grow and enhance tree growth. That's really important to us too, because we're encouraging growth in the parking strip, and in many cases throughout town, we don't have a lot of the sufficient topsoil to actually support growth. So this is just it's a recommendation in this right now, but we thought it was really important to include that. And we also talk about wooden mulch. We don't want to see the entire parking strip be wooden mulch, just due to the ability to be washed off site during heavy rain events. We've been fortunate enough in the past couple summers to see some large rain events, which we've seen a lot of stuff washed off. So once those wood chips get down into our storm sewer system, it's really hard to, it's costly and it's very difficult to remove those items. So the last thing is a landscaping pavers, edging, and rock mulch. Basically, we call this the hardscaping. We want to see the rock to be the 1 to 3 inch nominal size rocks. And this is where we're still really we're really asking the public for their input on this. As a group, we couldn't even really, there was 7 or 8 of us in the room, and we had differing opinions on whether or not we thought the parking strip, the hardscaping aspect could be a 1/4 or 1/3, or the parking strip could actually be hardscaped. So this is what we're really leaning towards the group tonight. And so if anybody in the audience has any input on this, we really would love to hear about it tonight. That's where, and our goal, when this is all said and done, we want to have a defined, whether it be a 1/4 or a 1/3 of the parking strip, to actually we want to have that defined clearly in there. So it's structural encroachments, basically retaining walls, fences, steps, boulders, or other similar structural encroachments in the parking strips are prohibited because they create safety hazards, limit access to sidewalk from the street, and they obstruct and increase the cost of difficulty. Basically, it's obstruct the visual sight lines and whatnot. And any exemptions to these structural encroachments must be specifically approved by the city engineer. Then we get into the permit section. And what we're basically saying here is that if someone chooses to install a concrete splash guard on an arterial or major collector street, we want you to actually obtain a permit with this. And the reason behind that is we don't want someone to do all this work and then have the city be in there doing a street project within a couple of years. So we want to work with our residents to make sure if you're going to do this, that you're doing it in the right time frame here, because we don't want to go through there and actually have to tear up a street when you have just done this. So we also get into where we're going to require a permit if you have we always refer to like as in a cul-de-sac, if you have a really small area that you want to put more rock than what's allowed, we're basically saying that talk to the city engineer and get a permit for that, because those small, isolated, difficult areas that are really hard to kind of grow any grass or anything like that will allow, this ordinance would allow you to have more rock or more hardscaping or whatever. The last section here is restoration. And in a nutshell, what we're getting at here is that if the city or any contractor is going to be doing any kind of work along your street or along your parking strip, we're going to do our best to notify you through mailings, through door hangers or what have you, or letters. I mean, we're going to do our best to get the word out there. However, we're going to have those unique situations where it's going to be an emergency situation, whether it's going to be a water main break or something like that. And at that point in time, we're saying that anything in that parking strip is the responsibility of the landowner. So if we're going to be there doing a street project, we're going to say that we're going to give you ample time to remove anything in the parking strip that you would like to, and then be able to put back in there. So that's the parking strip ordinance. That's what we've done so far. Like I said, we've added a few things, we've tweaked a few things, but nothing major from the last meeting. In the last couple sections here, we cover the International Property Maintenance Code. We talk about weeds, and then we also get into, like I talked about, that 36 inches, why we came up with that, with the intersection safety zone and then the driveway safety zone. And then we're also looking for this ordinance to be effective on May 15th, 2016. And with that, we're still, like we talked about last time, we're still looking at a 24-month time period here before we actually start, enforcing this ordinance. So the very first year, you'll see me out there a lot, talking to the public, talking to any kind of group I can get in front of to explain this ordinance. We're going to call it our public education campaign in the very first year. The second year, our goal is to do more of a written, like a warning. I don't know if it's going to be written or verbal yet, but a verbal warning system. And then obviously, after that 24-month time frame, then we're going to hope for compliance. But we're actually saying that this ordinance is effective on May 15, 2016. So it is our intention to get this thing to council soon. So.
Okay, very good, Matt.
Any other questions?
Do you want questions directed to Matt before we go to public input, or do you want to wait until after we do the public input? Let's move to the public input, and then we can bring you back up if you. No problem. I would just add when you were talking about the organic permeable soil, in addition to creating a favorable growing environment, it promotes drainage as well.
Yes, drainage is a big thing too. And I mean, obviously we heard some stuff from drainage today too, but we are, with those big rain events, we want to see more soil so we can have some stuff actually stay in place there too. So.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Okay, as we have done before, those of you that would like to address the committee, please state your name, and if you could keep your comments to 5 minutes or less, and if you can speak to things that are original or, in other words, have not been addressed previously, we would appreciate that, but we are glad to have you here. So. Good evening.
Good evening. Teresa Staley. First of all, I have a question. Matt, are we talking about a 3-year program? Did you say 2 years or 3 years? Because now I thought we were talking about 3 years this morning.
We could address that 3 years is kind of what we've been talked about, but 2 years is what's being recommended, and I'm only one voice. And
Right. So then, at what point are we going to be? Are you going to talk about 3 years, or are you? Are we pretty much taking what they're saying now as the?
Well, first of all, if you have comments that you would like to make, then we can address
Okay,
these
well,
questions.
okay. The comment that I'd like to make, first of all, is I think 3 years it makes sense to use that as the implementation to help the citizens out in the best, most user-friendly way. Also, I wanted to talk about the restoration part of F there. I would like that. He was talking about the city giving notification when possible, but I don't see that written down here. Am I missing that? Or can that? Because I just think that would be nice to have that written down, that that's going to be the policy to let people know. And I know in the past when they've come to work on my property, they have given me notification, let me have time to dig my things out, which I really appreciated. I did talk to Mark Cotter after the last land use committee, and I did express that I would like to see that I'd like to see small shrub roses be allowed. And I will say that you've got a salvia in the picture here. And actually, the picture that he has, these stems themselves could be quite rigid when it's growing. So a shrub rose can have, the smaller varieties can have a flexible stem. So I don't know that they would not be any more hazardous than a lot of perennials are going to be. So I would like to see roses, smaller roses allowed. And another question I had, it says that no fences will be allowed. Now, around my property, I have used a small wire decorative fence just for the ornamental value. I'm wondering if that would be prohibited, then maybe like this tall. I'd like to see like small decorative fencing allowed. That's my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you very much, Teresa.
Mary Ellen Conley. I don't have anything prepared, but I just really want to thank Matt for responding so favorably to all my concerns about topsoil and permeable soil. And I really don't think you'll be sorry, especially after hearing the previous concerns with drainage and maintaining stormwater ponds and cost sharing with development. I just still think that permeability is a huge, huge issue, and I'm really, really grateful that you're addressing it.
Okay.
Thanks again.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Good evening.
Greetings, Bruce Danielson. Some of us have landscaping that was done years ago with the approval of the city engineering department. Is that going to be grandfathered in? And I just wanted to make sure that the work that was approved all those years ago, I don't have to rip out, and some other friends that I have don't lose all the work they've done in areas of town where we don't have sidewalks and we don't have a lot of other issues that are brought up in a lot of the curb-based discussions. So I wanted to make sure that we're grandfathered. Then the other one is something rather near and dear to my heart, and that's the code enforcement processes, because they've been very abusive in this town and very strangely run, because if there's a problem, instead of coming and talking to us directly, we end up having to get pieces of paper that end up being stuck to doors or just laying out in our yards, and so we don't know that somebody's been there to even talk to us until we go out and clean our yards, or it's under a snowdrift or under a pile of leaves or something. We find this stuff in the little blue baggies, and I wanted to see what Matt and the code enforcement department are going to be doing as far as people who may not be quite in tune with what's happening. And I just want to make sure that the process is more citizen-friendly in the future, because we have had a real abusive problem that has not been citizen-friendly. I've been to court. It's cost me tens of thousands of dollars, and I'd rather not see other people have to go through the same thing. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Any other individuals wishing to address the committee? Well, then we'll open it up to council, and Matt, I'm assuming you're going to be required here because we have a number of questions. Councilor Jamison.
Yeah, I could do it just, if you would, you heard the input, and I could walk through them, maybe, could you walk through the 3-year implementation process? I mean, it's kind of 3 years, but it's really 2 years. Could you just reiterate that to see?
Sure. What the very first year, so when this is adopted, we're shooting for May. So then from May 16 to May of 17, it'll be in our public education campaign. And like I said, that's where I'll be reaching out. I'll be doing a lot of PSAs and press releases and whatnot, trying to get the word out that this thing's coming. Now the next year, so would be from May 17 to May 18, that would be a written warning, or we would, whether it be written or verbal. And then the next May would be the actual when we want compliance.
So really it is, I mean, that's really.
It kind of is a 3-year, really, if you think about it.
Matt, this is the way it was presented last month as well, during your slide presentation.
Yep.
Thank you, and I'm only going through the list.
Yeah,
Chair,
that's fine. That's fine, Councilor.
Yeah, so the other was the small shrub roses. How could they be considered, and if some of the plant parts are similar in nature to the one you've shown? What was your thought there?
Sure. This picture was one that was just, it wasn't an example of anything that we have here. It was just an example that we pulled off the internet for a picture to be used as a visual to kind of get that 36. The reason why we have the in there about shrubs and plants with thorns is basically for safety. And that's what our group has always talked about. Was the first thing for this ordinance was, one of the most important things in the ordinance was safety. So we really thought that having a plant like that with thorns in the actual parking strip, it poses a safety threat.
All right, very good. And the small decorative fences?
Small decorative fences. Now, are we talking actually in the parking strip? We're talking in the parking strip? Sure. That's something that we have, we've kicked that around, and we've had different things in there as far as like small decorative statues and whatnot. And we've kind of steered away from that just due to the fact that the main purpose of the parking strip is to have a living material in there. And when you get into that, allowing other things other than plant material in the parking strip, you really kind of open yourself up to having other taller things that'll be taller than the 36, whether it be like statues and whatnot. So we've really kind of geared our focus only to have plant material in that actual parking strip.
I get it. It kind of does seem like a safety issue. Okay, so 2 other items that were interesting to me that I hadn't heard of, the grandfathering clause and enforcement ideas on.
The grandfathering clause, that's something that we've talked about as a group, and we've came back to the same conclusion that it was the current ordinance as it reads right now.
Matt, if I could, I think just specify, I think he was referring to what he had clearance essentially that he had been given by previous administrations.
That's something that we'll have to, obviously we'll have to look into that. If it's been approved, if some work like that has been approved, then I think we'll have to look at that. We'll have to look at that and
So you're open to reviewing it?
Yes.
Kind of case by case?
Definitely. But I think to go further on that though, like if we don't want to go ahead and say that everybody that's out of compliance now is grandfathered in.
Right.
We don't really want to do that. But if there's been stuff that's been approved, yes, we'll take a look at it.
Okay, and then the idea of notice.
There's one thing with me, I mean, I forgot to introduce myself when I came up here. I'm Matt Tobias. I'm the new code enforcement manager for the city. One thing, and I got hired in September, and the one thing about me, that's just my personality and the way I am, is that I'm a very open person. And if I do, one of my main goals is to do what we said we would do with code enforcement and make it more of a city service. And I don't want the public to think that, we're just going to leave we're going to leave something laying in the yard and not going to hear from us. I'm really working hard, and it's my goal is to really change the perception of code enforcement. I don't want us to be out there to be known as these people that are just going to come cracking on the door. We want to work with our citizens, and we want to be as open as possible. And that's just, like I said, that's just me. And I had my previous position with the city. I was in stormwater, and we did a lot of enforcement with that. And that was my perception, even back then, was that always you heard from me, and that's what I'm telling my, I have a code enforcement officer under me, and that's what I'm telling us, that we want to be more open. So to that's something that we're definitely going to be working on. It's one of my main goals for the code enforcement team.
And if I may, there was one additional item that we've skipped over that Teresa had brought up, and that was the notification is not in ordinance language, but will that be established as
That's something
as
that we can
policy?
we can definitely look at that. We've talked about that in our group, and that's something we can definitely look at, putting that actually in the ordinance itself, where it says written notification be 48 hours or what have you. We can definitely look at that.
And does that create issues regarding private utilities that are
there's
acting independent of the city?
There's a separate ordinance out there that I know that covers the private utilities. So that's something we'll have to look at to make sure that those two mirror up with one another. So,
Councilor Staggers, you've been waiting patiently.
Yes. Matt, I think you used the word permit a number of times in your presentation. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes, permit is often associated with fees.
Yep.
But I don't see any fees here. And I'm glad.
Yes.
I mean, I'm happy about that. But I guess my concern is that in the near future, or whenever it might be, we will start adding fees.
Our intention at this point in time was to not have a fee associated with this. It really was to go back with that. We want to just make sure we're aware that someone's going to do that work. Now, because we want to make sure that, if someone's going to spend the money to put a concrete splash guard, which is a great idea, if they're going to put the splash guard in, we just want to make sure that we're not going to be on their street doing a street project within the next couple of years. So the intention wasn't that it was a permit. It was just to be more open with the public and have people actually talk to us about what they're going to do. And then also on that permit, we want to make sure that, when you have those odd shapes that, we're granting you the exemption to put more rock or a bigger splash guard in a small area. But yeah, the intention wasn't to really have a fee associated with anything. It was just to be more transparent, really.
Okay, thanks.
You bet. Thank you.
Councilor Anderson.
Yep.
Let's talk about structural encroachment.
Yep.
Mailboxes, the brick mailboxes that you're going to see probably more south of 57th Street. Mm-hmm. We have some that are probably 4 or 5 feet tall. Some of them I've seen that are at least 3 feet wide. How are we going, in our 3-year plan, how are we going to deal with those?
We, at this point in time, have decided to keep mailboxes out of this parking strip ordinance for now and just deal strictly with vegetation for the most part. But we've kept that out of this for now.
But would they not, some of these fall under like the height restrictions? And
some of them actually would fall under the height restrictions, but like I said, from what I'm hearing from my director and the other directors, is that we're keeping this out for now, the mailbox.
Very interesting. And then restoration. Could you speak a little bit more on restoration as far as if there's an emergency and we have to come in there, there isn't going to be any notification. It's just we're going to dig it up And then what we're gonna replace is dirt and grass.
Yeah, basically, that's exactly what it says. A restoration, if it's an emergency, we have to get in there and do our work we need to do. We'll replace it with, basically dirt and seed or sod.
Any other questions? Councilor Jameson.
Matt, you sat and listened, and I know the rest of us have as well. Nobody kind of really brought up any recommendation on the 25 or a quarter or a third.
Third.
And I would just only, in the light of that and involvement over the years and the current ordinance, that I would propose that we put that at a 25%. I mean, the current ordinance today doesn't allow any. The intention, we're trying to provide flexibility, inspire people to do different things with that. I think 25% is kind of a good starting point.
Yeah.
And so I would propose that language be changed to 25%.
And if I could add, I think, Matt, you'd indicated you had met with a local gardening club,
Yep.
and they were leaning toward that 25%.
Yes, they were. Yeah, they were.
Well,
Yep.
with the design of having more vegetative versus
More living space, yeah, exactly. More living material.
Councilor Anderson, did you?
No.
And then I guess too, so we've addressed that particular item, that you were looking for additional feedback, and the May 15th effective date, I just guess I would like to throw that out to the group. Is that soon enough? I mean, that's been our effort. It's, in South Dakota, we can't plant much earlier. You're risking things if you do. But,
Chair.
all right.
Once again, with the May 15th, that just starts the 3-year
That's the
plan.
effective.
So I don't see where anybody's going to be affected by that.
Well, technically, they would be out of compliance if they were planting things taller than 8 inches right now, technically. Anything other than turf or trees. So they'd be out of compliance up until this is effective. So,
yeah.
Any other questions? Councilor Jameson.
If I could, just as I think as a summary that was started to clarify from you, really there are no fees associated with this new change. And
No.
I think that's important for everybody to know.
Yeah.
As Kermit's uttering, not yet, but I get it. For what we're doing.
At this time, yeah.
Today, I think that's fair to have you say those words, because I think some might think there could be a chance. So, there are other pieces of this that I think Matt has covered well regarding the safety issues, and he'll deal with the grandfathering clause, the enforcement notices. He's developing a plan, changes.
I guess something has come. I'm going to go back to the mailboxes, Matt.
Sure.
We do have them inside the city that are definitely well outside of, anything that we're going to approve or would approve. And we're going to probably have more people wanting to build them. Are we going to permit them? See, because we're sort of sticking ourselves into a corner here by not addressing this. And that's my concern is that I know there are a lot more people who would like to do them, and I guess I'd maybe want to address that with your directors.
Definitely.
I'm
I
not
think
against them, but I just think that it's something that we might as well be proactive about and take care of this whole thing.
Yep.
Because once again, as we talk about height, and then we have other structures, boulders, things like that, these are going to fall right inside of what we're already discussing.
Definitely. So I think a good thing for us to do is it's been talked about in our group. We've been meeting and working on this ordinance. We've really put all of our fruits of labor into the vegetation aspect of this. But as a group, we can sit back and take a look at if we do want to include mailboxes in this, or if we want to separate mailboxes out for a different time or what. But that's something I guess it's only fair to go back and ask the group and our directors to say, hey, maybe we should look at mailboxes with this ordinance. But something we can definitely bring up.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
And I would add too that we have had a little discussion about the mailboxes, and there needs to be communication between the city
Yeah.
and Federal Postal Service
Yes,
as well,
definitely.
because that seems to be in flux in terms of what they're moving toward, because we're already dealing with that in parts of the cities where we don't have, or residents do not have individual mailboxes like the rest of us. It's big clusters of them, similar to what you would find in apartment complexes.
Definitely.
And technically, I guess all of our mailboxes would be out of compliance, because even the non-brick structured mailbox is going to be higher than that 3 feet.
They are going to be higher than 36.
But obviously, it's maybe a sightline issue more than anything.
It is.
And then the fees, and if, to address Councilor Stagger's concern, any fees would have to be passed by city council in the future. So there would be required meetings, first, second reading at the minimum for that.
Yep. And the last thing I want to add, I mean, it's, we've really, the whole purpose behind this parking strip ordinance, and it was to actually increase and engage the community to actually be more flexibility. You know, our current ordinance basically states that you can have grass, and that's pretty much about it. So with this, we really want to open the doors. We want to encourage sustainability. We want to give our citizens the right to kind of be creative and create flower gardens and whatnot in the parking strips. So with that, that's all I have.
Thank you very much, man.
Thank
we
you.
appreciate your work. And as we've stated, we've tried to make this as user-friendly as possible for all involved, and increasing the flexibility. And from the positive comments that we have received over the past month, it seems that we're moving in that direction, and we still have a couple of things that we need to iron out, but we do need to maintain the functionality of the intended use of the right-of-way, and also keeping public safety in mind, too. So we'll move on to open discussion.
Do we have a motion?
Oh,
Are
I'm
we gonna
sorry, yes, we,
here or move it
Councilor
to-
Jameson and I had the opportunity to talk with non-committee council members, and they were all right with moving this to first reading versus coming back again to informational, since this is actually our third open public discussion of this topic. So would anybody like to make a motion or have any discussion regarding that?
Well, if I could.
Yes, Councilor Jameson.
The issue was whether or not there was anything that would blow up, and then we could bring it forward. And you know, we have had a few issues come up. I think they can be addressed prior to that first reading, and get a sense that we can address it then, and if we have to amend it, we can. But I would urge us to move forward with this and schedule a first reading with the entire for the council, and I know there'll be some time between now and then that we can continue to work on this and discuss the issues related to the mailboxes and others. So I'll make a motion to send it to the council.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Same sign? Okay, motion carries unanimously. All right, now we'll move into open discussion. Any additional items that any of you would like to address? Okay, seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.